like to get closer and walk around. I'm going to try to stay behind the mic, just in case this is being recorded, because I think it is. So, my name is Leo. I went to Pitt Bradford in a scarily long time ago. Let's just let it suffice to say it's longer than you want to know. So, I don't know, I woke up one day and I was like old, and I don't know when that happened. So, I grew up and spent a lot of my life thinking that I was going to be a pastor. Like, I was deeply convinced that that was my lot in life. Ironically, I've done just about everything since college but be a pastor, which is great because that's what my degree was in, so it's very useful. But I always had this sense of calling that I thought that's what I was going to be. I was going to be working in a church. In reality, I've been many things. I've been an athlete, I've been a photographer, I've been a social worker for almost a decade. More recently, I'm a parent, I'm a cosmetology student, and I am genderqueer. Coming out initially for me was basically the biggest crisis I had ever experienced. I grew up in this world that was very certain, and there were lots of blacks and lots of whites, and there was a lot of right and wrong because of the religious context that I grew up in. And realizing myself to be, at the time, a lesbian was just basically like dropping a bomb on everything I ever thought I knew. I had the most radical crisis of faith and self-understanding, and it took me, from the first inkling that I thought I might be gay, it took me about 4 or 5 years to say out loud, in an affirmative manner that I was gay. I would say, like, I think I might be gay, I think I might like women, I don't think I'm straight, and it took me a solid 4 to 5 years to say, I am gay. At that point, I came out to my parents during my junior year of college in a pastoral ministry major program at Conservative Evangelical College, which, let me tell you, is not entirely a crackpot time to come out as LGBTQ. It didn't entirely go over well with the faculty and staff, but it was what I had to do. And one of the best things about my coming out story, there were a lot of terrible things about it. There was a lot of negative response. There was a lot of excommunication from my family and stuff. But I was lucky enough to have a few key people in place at my college that they were able to kind of step in and take over that parental friendship mentor role in my life. One of the people that was in that role was my friend Michelle. She was the dean of students at the time, and at the time I went to my college, it was actually against the rules. You could be kicked out for being gay. And it just so happened that I found myself in Barcelona, Spain, on a mountaintop, looking at a snow-capped mountain, in the border of France, sitting there talking to Michelle. And I realized, I felt this welling up in my throat, and I realized I needed to tell her. I needed to tell her I was gay. And from that moment on, she was my biggest advocate. To be honest, if she hadn't worked at the school, I wouldn't have graduated. She looked at me in the eye that day and she said, I think it's okay to be you. I love you. You are a good person, and I'm going to make sure that you graduate. And so actually, the day that I got my transcripts for graduation was the day that she submitted her resignation letter. Of course, we were both crying, and it was a great moment, but it was this moment of listen, we both made it out, because she was in equally as hostile of an environment just for being an ally. But during the course of coming out, it wasn't a one-time thing that happened for me. Like I said, there was a lot of struggle in there, and a lot of just conversations sitting with Michelle with the door locked, making sure Robin, her secretary, wasn't around so that she couldn't hear the heresy that we were talking about. But we were talking about, what does it mean if you understood yourself to be a pastor and to be a Christian? What does it mean to be gay? Because in the circles that I was in, those weren't the two things that coexisted. And she told me a story. She had been a dean of students at a college on the West Coast. It was much more liberal. So she was having these conversations a solid 10 years before I was having it with her. And she said she had a student that was in leadership come into her office, and he said to her, I'm gay, and I don't know what that means. How can I still hold on to my faith and be a gay person? And so they took a whiteboard, and on the top she wrote, "This is what I believe." And this student wrote down everything that they believed. And then, one by one, they looked at them and they said, is this essential? Is this the main thing? If my faith didn't include this, would it still be the same faith? And so what they worked down to was the essential tenets of his faith. And I did the same thing with Michelle. And what I worked down to was that it didn't matter who I loved or how I loved, but what it mattered was that I loved. Because I believe, based on the tenets of faith that I grew up with, if I am doing what is most loving, then I am being the best version of myself. And doing what is most loving, it plays out in all aspects. You can do what's most loving for the world around you. You can do what's most loving for the people that you encounter, and you can do what's most loving for yourself by coming out and by being your most authentic self. I've since taken that and used that in the rest of my life to gauge every sort of decision I've made since then, including transitioning. I realized that there's actually a piece of religious poetry, and it says, above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. And I think that means you have to know yourself, and then you have to fiercely be yourself. You have to protect yourself in a world that doesn't want you to exist all the time. And so I've taken that poetry and those understandings of my faith, and I've allowed that to let me become the truest iteration of myself with every new day. And about 635 days ago, that included beginning to medically transition. It's not been an easy road. It's definitely not one that you just kind of wander onto because it's the easiest course. That's my favorite thing, like, it was so easy to be gay. I could have just chosen not to, but being gay was the easier path. Or being trans was the easier path. Let me tell you, it's not the easier path, but it was the right path for me. So I, in this process of transition, have had to come to a radical understanding of having grace with myself. Everything's not black and white. Everything is not right or wrong. In many ways, life itself is queer. There are very few situations that are this or that. There are very few people that are this or that. In every situation that we come to in our life, we need to have a sense of grace for ourselves and those around us, because every person you meet is transitioning in some way. If we're constantly growing as a person, we should be constantly changing our understandings of ourselves and the world around us, and that requires for us to have a lot of sense of love and grace as we move about our paths. The world is a spectrum and life is queer. And by me standing here today, making it out of that environment to be who I am today, it wasn't easy, but I made it. I made it because a lot of people loved me and because I found the ability to love me in a context where I wasn't supposed to do that. I wasn't supposed to love myself, but somehow I made it out of that, and I think it's because of the supports I've had around me. The thing that I want you guys to leave knowing today is that if I can be here, you can be here too. And if I can be here and be authentic, then you can be here and be authentic too. Because no matter what, there's at least one other person that gets existing outside of the binary. There's at least one other person that understands, listen, we don't have all the answers and we don't necessarily know what the end product is going to be like, but life is a spectrum and the world is queer and you can exist as you are in it, and I will give you grace to be that person even if no one else does. I'm confident in a room like this, there's a lot of other people that are going to give you grace, but even if there wasn't, I would. And we need to stand together, especially on National Coming Out Day, and stand up and say, listen, we're all very different, we're all queer, we don't fit into necessarily one category in some way or the other, but that difference, that gives us solidarity, and we have a privilege to stand up in the world today and say we're here and we're queer, and that's something that we can celebrate. Thank you.